Hi, everybody. It's June. Where did the first half of the year go? Crazy. And it's nice thing that we're in the final month of H1 of the year. So let's kick things off. I do not believe Mr. Bernstein will be able to join us today, which is fine. I think we can handle it without adult supervision. Looking forward to today's discussion and where things might go. We don't, typically the way we manage these meetups is we have new people introduce themselves. I don't see anybody new. We have a theme or jump into a theme if we've got one. We initially had a theme or a guest speaker for today to talk about a new note-taking tool that he uses when teaching his students. He's down in Argentina. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it today. We punted him off to June 29th. And then when we don't have a theme, we will jump into topics and discussions that we're all and projects that we're all working on. We do have a theme for the 15th, though, coming up. Next week we don't, but on the 15th we have Andrew Bland, who will be talking about how he's integrated his version of an MCP server with Claude to interact with Tinderbox. And again, on the 29th, we're going to have another guest speaker from Argentina, who's going to be talking about Lucas Wilder from Agile Engine, who's going to be talking about a tool called AnyType. And it's an open source tool that I'd never seen before, so it's kind of interesting to see how he's using it to teach knowledge management to his students as he's doing his digital marketing efforts and such. So we do have a couple guest speakers this month, but today we don't. So let's jump into talking about whatever projects you were all working on and such. If I can kick off, I'd like to start with a couple of agenda items. One is, if we're so inclined, I thought it would be fun to go through an exercise of what it would take to be able to set up and parse meeting notes. Another project I'm working on is I'm working on a cybersecurity book, so I think it'd be fun to talk about that topic. Just finishing up my glossaries and indexing project, so I don't necessarily need to demo that today, but that's just an announcement of what I'm working on. But I'd love to hear what everyone else has got up their sleeves. And the one other topic I might want to think about is we could delve into the discussion of using Tinderbox to create more efficient approaches for collection. So for like today, for this book project I'm working on, there's a lot of initial research and framing that needs to be done. So I'm doing a lot of AI work. Give me these lists, give me these ideas, and I'm using AI, or give me the various industry frameworks for analyzing and parsing an industry. And then I'm getting that input from ChatGPT and then pulling that into the Tinderbox and using Tinderbox to parse out that material to help it be easier to manage and align with. So we can certainly talk about those discussions as well. But that's what I have on my plate. What else does anybody else have? Mr. Paul.
Been a while since I've joined live, so I'm glad to be back. I spent the last week kind of laid low with a case of some kind of version of the flu, so I've been pretty much quarantined. But I decided to spend the time picking up Mark Bernstein's newest book, Thinking with Tinderbox, and going through it and forcing myself to go through it. And I say that because I've been lying around and I hadn't touched it for over a month. But I did, and I cannot say enough good things about that book. I can't imagine who the audience is, to be honest. It's kind of a difficult book to get into, but having read it, it has just opened my mind in so many ways to kind of the track of hypertext over time and the track of all the kind of inventions and research that went into the antecedents of what became Tinderbox, and gave me such an appreciation for the tool as it is today and how it can be applied to so many different things, and how it's not been applied to some of them and should be. It gave me a great appreciation for returning to work in Tinderbox in map view as opposed to outline view. And I've done that with a couple projects this week. Where anytime I think, oh, maybe I'll open up a mind map, I turn instead to Tinderbox map view, and I find so much more ability to express what's going through my mind. And then, beautifully at the end, have the ability to look at a timeline, have ability to export what I've just done, have ability to translate it into some other platform. So it's given me a great appreciation for Tinderbox. Last thing I'll say is it's the first time that I understood and used and put into practice posters. So all of that has led me to really be a strong fan of this book.
And let's talk about so first, anybody have any reactions to that? And then I've got some questions.
Well, I'll just throw in one. I think it's really good to hear that, because I think actually your opening point was quite eloquent. You're thinking, well, why not? Isn't this a bit beyond me? Because it's very wide canvas. But it is interesting to think that, yeah, there is more to apps than please like and subscribe, which is about where we've got to in the modern age. And over the 20 years I've been using the tool, I mean, I've been gently schooled by polite replies saying that, after saying grumble, 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 I think you'll find it's a little bit more complicated than that. And in fact, there's this whole body of work that proves that this idea is perhaps not what you thought it was. So it is nice, and I think you put it really well. It's probably not something. I think the thing is, it's probably not what most people think it is when they pick it up. So you might have to put it down and pick it up a week later when you've decided, oh right, okay, this isn't the sort of thing I'll whiz through and then stick on the stack. But no, I really enjoyed hearing your comment on the book.
Yeah, and again, I think that the part of the challenge is the title. The title leans us towards thinking that it's going to teach us how to think with Tinderbox, and it's not a procedural book, as I put in the forward. It's more of a history of computing and how and why we think with tools like Tinderbox and all the tools that come around it. And I think that's and so that's where I really, like you, I really appreciated that long history and how we got here and how it framed Mark's thinking. And I really like too how Mark talked about too how he got some things right, got some things wrong, how it's, he really, explained his own thinking process and the evolution of the tool. And so yeah, in that context, it's a wonderful book. But you're right, it can be, there's a lot there. Mr. Art.
Oh, hey, everybody. Yeah, I will confess first off that even though I bought the book on day one, I haven't had a chance to more than just glance at it. Nice work on the forward, though, Michael. But the conversation has made me just think about the idea of Tinderbox and why it's like as a tool in the toolkit, it's one that comes so readily to hand. And I was thinking of it in terms of that whole incremental formalization. I think one of the things that I feel like if I'm just starting out on a branch of thinking or planning or whatever it is, that's ideating. Tinderbox is like the most ideal tool, especially if I don't know where I'll be going with that idea or how I'll be building it. There might be something as a contrast, there might be something that I know right away that will be done in a spreadsheet from the first moment I can see the finish of it in the spreadsheet. So that I won't bother with Tinderbox in those cases. But in the ones that I absolutely have no idea or I don't even know what that, it's going to stop and go, the rate of progress itself also varies. That's just what I wanted to contribute anyway.
Absolutely. Anybody else raise a hand who's actually read the book? I have. Mark, Bernstein, Paul. All right. So for here's your homework assignment for all. Maybe we can do a book review, a more detailed book review. I'll drop the link in the chat. Come on, why won't it let me here?
Yeah.
There we go. All right.
So next week we can read 20 AI summaries of the book.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Fantastic. So what other thank you for that, Paul. what other and by the way too, Paul, and also thank you for your comment you gave on the YouTube video for that PDF Pandoc exporting tool.
Oh, sure. Very valuable.
Yeah, appreciate that. Anybody else have any other projects you're working on before we jump into any pet projects that I might throw out there?
I had one quick question, if you don't mind. So
Yeah,
when you guys write,
yes, go ahead.
when you guys, I mean, I've seen the three of you, Eastgate, Mark, Anderson, and yourself do it and demos and things like that. And when you're embarking on a function, you'll immediately go in and declare a variable. So now the process of doing that, you know, setting up a variable or whatever and set var equals so and so, I do know about the process of doing it. I'm just wondering, what is the key motive behind it? What is why is it the first thought that comes to mind?
I'll take a run at that because it's useful for you to say that, because in fact it's not the process. It isn't that thou shalt start with a variable. It's more that you do something, right? Basically, I'm going to take something in, I'm going to do something with it, I'm going to put something out. The likelihood is that what you take in is not what you put out. So you're going to need something to put the thing you're working on into, or it might be, you might need several nibbles at it. But essentially, I think that's the simplest way of putting it. So, you know, there's something coming in and there's something going out, and you're doing some sort of transformation, extraction, reduction, whatever, of what comes in. And so that you don't saw off the branch you're sitting on, you need somewhere to put that safely whilst you're doing all these things. So that's really what the variable did. And the variable came to us in about version 5, because before that, if you needed to store something, you basically had to make an extra user attribute, which is, those who've been around that long and with the app will remember doing it. And it was a pain in the bum, because apart from this, you'd fill up all these things with sort of lists and tons of it of stuff, and then you think, I better remember to clean that out at the end. One of the nice things for those of us who come to this not from a coding background is that, so you make something, you collect something, and the variable clears up its kitty litter at the end. So you might have sort of saved everything in the document, doubled it, and then sort of put it out. That's all gone. The variable tidies itself up. So that's a really neat other notion. But in a sense, the variable is just somewhere to stick things while you're doing stuff to it. You can declare.
So you're immediately.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So you're drawn to the ephemerality of it, that in the sense that as soon as this function's over, it cleans itself up and boom, it's gone.
Yeah, a variable.
Whatever I choose to do now.
A variable is an ephemeral attribute that you only use in that current, process of thinking.
And that's why, in fact, you choose to set up a variable, because you know that you just don't want this to last outside of this little experiment.
Well, that's one reason. The other reason is, for me at least, more often than I'm getting pretty good at it, but a lot of the times I actually don't know where this story is going to end. And so I don't necessarily know what data type this is, or what data type it needs to be. And so by having a variable, it allows me to, I can change the nature of the data I'm working with just by changing its declaration. So I can quickly go from between a list and a set, or a dictionary, by changing the declaration of the variable, and that declaration then will automatically propagate throughout all of my code. So if I've spent a lot of time writing some code, and I'm like, oh, that really needs to be a list, not a set. I can change the variable declaration in one place, and the rest of my code will adopt. And I found that has some, quite a few efficiencies in the process.
Right. So you're speaking to what Mark was saying in terms of, like, you're going to set about processing something anyway, so it's a nice way to sort of contain and manage it.
Yes. And to his point too, the other reason why I use it is it's a method of path of least destruction. So,
Okay.
you can manipulate the variable in this ephemeral state, transform it, transclude it, use the show method of to kind of see what your action code is doing, and you're, as opposed to like overwriting text, or what Mark refers to as sawing the branch that you're on. A lot of the times what you do is you'll write action code, and then you'll say, I want to replace the name. But what happens if all the text you were trying to parse was actually in the name? So you've just replaced the name, and then the rest of your action code has nothing to split because you've deleted it. So there's a whole process of and that's actually one of the demonstrations I wanted to use this morning. So it's interesting that you leaned in on that, so we can actually show that.
Oh, great. Sounds good. Thank you. Okay,
Steve,
cool.
Within the Tinderbox context and other places for coding and similar kinds of things, a variable might represent what you're starting with, but more often than not, it's what you hope to end up with, or some intermediate something. So it's a way to think through the problem. It's really a thinking thing. It's really okay, what am I trying to achieve? Or to get to that end goal, what are the pieces and parts that I need to have? I'm talking pretty abstract, but it's a way of structuring your thinking.
Okay, it's like you're designing like an electronic circuit, for example. You're designing the whole series of processes around where you are and where you want to get to. And
Right,
you're just dumping all those into variables, and you'll multiply, add, whatever you'll operate them in order to get your final result.
Well, and so for example, more often than not, I'll start my action code by starting with a list, because I do a lot of list work. And then the very next variable, I'll create a string, because I know at the end of the day, I'm going to want a string output that will come out of that list. And then that interim string result will make its way into into other attribute values. And again, I'll demonstrate that in a few minutes if you guys want to see that, to help to make it more practical. The other thing, what I found too, is in working with installers, and this is actually kind of interesting, it gets a bit more complex, but you can create a variable called, say, vnote, and then as the action code is and then if you assign the output of a create operator to vnote, so if you say vnote equals create some note, the path of the note you just created will get parked in the variable vnote. So for as long as you haven't changed that variable vnote, you can use that vnote designator to create, establish prototypes, or modify the note that you've just created. And then as soon as you're done acting on that note, you create another note with the same variable vnote. And so that, again, that concept of having a variable really makes your code super, super clean, and easily maintainable. And again, that's something else I can demonstrate. It helps to visualize it.
Oh yeah, I'm totally getting the pictures as to the functions. Excellent. Like it's like a solver, essentially.
Yeah. And again, you're able to adjust that parking place value in the context to which you're using it, and then reestablish what that parking place value means later down in the path.
Got it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. And again, I can demonstrate. It's a much easier to quickly visualize and demonstrate. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, well, so I'll seed this next comment with a lovely phrase I came across the other day, which is the illusion of competence, which was about people using AI, but I'm using it about humans. Is that so? When it's something that came up in Parsing in Arts commenters. So you do this and you declare this and you declare a type. So variables don't have to have a type, and one of the reasons that seasoned users of them probably do declare a type is because essentially it's being very, very explicit to Tinderbox that no, I want this to be a string or something you'd regard as a number or a date. In other words, I don't want you to have to guess. Because originally Tinderbox was, I suppose, close in style to the idea of AppleScript that never really took off. So you just write down what you want to do, and the computer figures it out for you. Turns out human language isn't that unambiguous, and so that whole thing never really took off. So it's odd at first sight for us as humans who don't have a sort of background or hinterland of doing coding stuff, why you need to be so specific. But it's just like giving very accurate directions to someone who you know is minded to misunderstand things. You just need to say exactly what you know. No, not that, not the first left, the first road on the left, not the first footpath on the left. It's that sort of thing. So it's easy to get lost in. The other thing is that I know, and I'm as guilty as any, because one of the things I set out to do with ATVRF was to use the sort of syntax that was sort of declaratory. But you don't need to do that. I try and do that to signal to people reading to it what I'm trying to put across, that this thing is a list as opposed to a set or something. But there's no requirement. So if you declare a variable, you could call it my set :set. Well, not my set. Sorry, that's an actually no. Naughty me. You could call it you could call it vlist : you could call it var set vlist, and it would be a set. It is what you tell it to be. And I just wanted to make that point because I think it can be a bit oppressive when starting out with this thing. Oh, I've got to decide all these things in advance, which is the reason so many people give up on sort of a casual degree of coding, because there are so many questions before you get to decide what sort of ice cream you want to have, that they just say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. So don't be oppressed by that. It's something, essentially, when you know what you want, say what you want, and then there's no ambiguity between you and your computer counterparty, bugs and things aside. So I think it's just worth pulling that out, because it can appear at outset that there's this formalism you have to adopt. You don't. It really boils down to enlightened self-interest.
It's really funny you just said that, because I was interacting with one of my students this week, and now that you said that, it dawned on me how and why I responded to her in the way I did. We were messing around for like an hour trying to figure out what her problem was with one of the homework assignments I assigned. And so at the conclusion of that hour, I finally said, okay, we've both learned something really important from this process. One is, I need to be more accurate, have less typos, and be clearer. Two, you need to learn specificity, right? We just spent 45 minutes for you to tell me that it was actually, you were having a problem with, bullet number 3 in the second section of the assignment. But you just, and again, it's an asynchronous class, so it's all back and forth via text. So it would have been much faster if it was verbal. But she was just having a terrible time with specificity, and that's the exact so if she were treating me like Tinderbox, right? Please look at bullet number 3 and fix that. It would have been saved us 45 minutes. So specificity is really, really critical. All right. On that note, shall we jump in and demonstrate this a little bit? Would that be fun for everyone, or do you want to keep talking about it? All right. I will jump in and pull up DeskPad. Let me pull up my DeskPad and we'll demonstrate it. So that kind of leads to. Let me get my DeskPad ready. Oops. Yeah, we'll get a Tinderbox file ready. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to key off of Art's question about variables and use this as a learning opportunity for all of us. So let's share the screen. Share. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you see my screen. Got it. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to play around and toy with this idea called variables and what they mean. And we'll first start. Sorry, my screen keeps bouncing around. There we go. Come on. There we go. Okay. So in Tinderbox, when you're writing action code, you've got this thing called variables, and variables can be used anywhere you can use action code. So and then just as an aside, while I'm thinking about this, let's write a note here. There are a ton many people may not be aware of. So very quickly, we're the most common place we tend to think about using action code are in rules and edicts. We'll often think about too the ability, and I don't know how many people use this, but the ability to use action code in the remove, meaning that when you're removing something from a container, that would be, and I'm constantly asking. I want Mark Anderson to put an on visit button here, so that I don't have to keep going to the quick snap to get it, because you can also use action code on the on visit. So we've talked about this before, if you put an expression in here, you can use action code on the on visit. And once I'm done talking, I'll actually drop this in the chat and point out other places that we can use action code. For example, another place for action code is the display expression. You can use action code in our display expression. You can use action code in the on action links. You can use action code in stamps. Other places that people may not be aware of action code is the hover expression. So if you've got action code in the hover expression and you mouse over an image that a file that has an image associated with it, that will pop up a thumbnail of that image. So there's just all of these different places that action code can be used. Another place for action code, which is a new one, is on paste. So when a node is pasted, that will trigger action code. So there's a bunch of places that action code can be used. And in any of these environments to which we are using action code, we can use this concept called a variable. So let's go ahead and and often when you're first playing with action code, and again, I apologize for those that are on the call and you're thinking I'm being a bit pedantic. Don't mean to. I just also thinking about those who are watching this video for the first time and may not be aware of some of these concepts. We can use action code in stamps, and using and a stamp is a great place to start your journey in framing and working with action code to make it happen. You can also use action code in functions, which we'll demonstrate in just a minute. So if you're creating a stamp, let's just start with the first stamp, and you can name that stamp if you want. And what a lot of the times what we'll do is, let's say we've got a note here called my string. And let's say put in hello world in my string. And so a lot of times people would just say my string equals, yeah, we could say it now. Actually, let's do this. Say text equals my string. Right. So you're essentially saying, let's make the text equal to the my string. But what if we wanted to modify that a little bit, or play with that, or give temporary values? So rather than just making something up on the fly, I will demonstrate to you a real world case that I did just like literally seconds before we were done with the call. All right. So let me, yeah. Let me rename this just a minute. Just for protecting some privacy stuff here. All right. Come on. I've got to close my ChatGPT and reopen it. Just a minute. So now, let's say I was just doing this morning. I was thinking about, different methodologies that we can use for, and I'll just kind of go through the entire chat and show you the interaction I was having. Quite long, actually. So I initially asked chat, like, I started saying, what was the para method? And I got that wrong. And then I said, no, what I want is, what are the different frameworks that we could be using to analyze a industry? So so this new book project I've got, I'm being tasked with, starting out with a macro evaluation of what's happening in an industry. And so I said, give me the frameworks that we use to evaluate an industry. So there's the Pestle method, Porter's method, SWOT method, value analysis. So we actually have, that's been developed over the last 45, 50 years. We've got a whole variety of different frameworks that we use as an industry. So this is good, and it's a nice framework. But then I was thinking about, and it gave me a summary of the key thoughts and ideas. And then I said, okay, this is fantastic. So now what I want you to do is, output this into a framework that I can parse. And I initially said, have it give me this framework that I can parse at colons. And that was a mistake, which I'll demonstrate to you right now. So let's create a new note. Right. And to paste this in, so I've asked the basically ChatGPT to take the table that it represented to me and then show me that table into a delimited list. So the name of the item, the category of that item, its description, the author, and a URL if they had it. And now what I want to do is, because my intention is I want to use the split operator to be able to split this in a list and to populate items into the various attribute values. Now, again, there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. I've just found the split operator, when you get the delimiters right, the split operator is one of the most efficient and effective ways to do what I'm about to show you. But as is the case with Tinderbox, there's one way to do something, there's 10. And 10 being the universal number for, there's like an infinite ways to get it done. So the immediate problem I ran into is a URL has a colon in it. So if I split this list at the colon, I'm splitting the URL at the at that wrong colon, and then that causes a problem. So there's an example of sawing the branch off of the from underneath you. So that's an immediate issue that I had to contend with, and I'll show you how I solved that. And maybe I'm jumping ahead too far and too quickly with some like and how do you word it, Mark, when I've got that preconceived knowledge that I forget that people don't realize I forget what I know when I'm doing some things like that. You and I talked about it on Thursday. You're on mute. What's the term we use for that?
Yeah, so blessed sponge of amnesia has wiped it from my mind, so I'm not sure, but essentially,
but it's the idea.
I mean, it's about partly it's about unstated assumptions.
Yeah, that's it. Understated assumptions, right? So I've got a lot of
unstated.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of unstated assumptions I'm making here because I do this like every day, and so if I jump over an assumption I'm making, that please let me know. So I'm going to go ahead and create a note real quick. We'll call it P notes. And the very next thing I'm going to first add, because I know there's some items that, and just based on the structure that I just had in the data, there's items that I know I want. I want a category. I want a URL. I want an author. And I often citation. Some of my, because I do so much of my work is academic, I do a citation key, and we'll make that a set. Author is because we might have multiple authors and we might have multiple categories. So we'll make these sets as well. Okay, so I've got a note. And so now I'm going to think about how do I want to go about parsing this this item. Now the very first thing I know, and let's just demonstrate it and show you where the mistake is, and then we can go from there. So we're going to do first parse example. All right. So the very first thing I know is what I want to do is I want to turn every one of these items into each one of them. I want to interrogate each one of these individually as a list. So the first step I do, so I use chat to get the list that I wanted. The next step I do is I explode it at paragraph marks. And so now I get all of the individual notes exploded into their individual items. And then I can start working on them individually. Now, the other reason why I want to use variables is because of this point of the least option of destruction. So you can work on, and sometimes you have to, you very rarely do you get the code right out of the gate. So sometimes you have to iterate it to get it appropriate. So right now I know immediately I want a list. So I'll type variable list list. Okay, and that will be something. Now, where do I want that list coming from? So when I didn't explode, that list is both in its name as well as in its text. So let's just say I'm going to initially start with getting the list from the text. Okay, so now I've got that string of information in the text, but this is not yet a list. Excuse me, yeah. So in order to make this text into a list, I need to tell it to split at the colon. So what I'm saying is go through this text, and I want you to now generate a list and splitting it at the colon. Now, another way we could go about doing this is, and it's sometimes helpful to create a log, so that as you're doing this, you can understand what you're about to see. So every good thing goes to 11. So we're going to say text equals log 11, right? And you don't really need the logging once you figure it out and you know what you're doing. So we'll go ahead and we'll say list, list. Okay, so we're saying take my text, put it into a list, split that list at a colon, and let's see what we get. So we go to the log, and we've now got a list. And you'll see that all the colons have been replaced by semicolons. And you notice right out of the bat, I've just lost my URL because that colon got split. And there's another reason. Actually, Mark answered that. I wanted to ask you about this too. When I did this today. So and so we're often doing pattern matching, and we're looking at this. So immediately my first thought is, okay, I don't want to be parsing at colons. So then I went back to ChatGPT and I said, and then I asked it a bunch of things like, what's my own framework and all of that. And I put that in. And then ultimately I said, okay, you know what I really want to do, let's go all the way to the end, is rather than using the colon, I want to use the section mark. Because that's going to be more universally unique across all the notes. So let's create a note number 3 now. And we'll paste in our new items. We'll eliminate at the. So now I can say, you know what? I actually want to parse out of that section mark instead of the colon. Right? And now if I hit the list and we go to the log, we'll see the section mark is now parsed. So I didn't lose my colon this time in the URL, but I did lose everything after the forward slashes. And so, Mr. Anderson, this was actually a question I had for you, is why do we think the Tinderbox is breaking at the forward slashes and that using the split function?
Well, I wouldn't expect it to. If you'd asked it, well, hold on a second. So log 11 is the output of what?
Log 11 is the output of our splitting at the section marks.
Can I see the actual output of the split though? Forget the log.
Yeah, log 11 is the actual output of the split.
So basically, it's only finding one thing out of the whole lot.
No, it's finding everything. It's just deleting the forward slashes on the. It's created a list. So let me show you. Okay, let me finish my story and then I'll go through it. Yeah, we'll circle back. I'll show you how to do it. Art, you had a question, and then I'll show you what I did.
No, I was just going to ask, is that a regex thing?
Yeah, it is. It is. But okay, so let me show you how I solved this.
Just quickly, I think probably useful for people watching later is, so you might ask, well, why am I, what's special about a section mark? There isn't anything special. It's that the problem you have when you want to do what Michael's doing is that you run out of things that you can easily type that aren't mistaken for something else. So things like the section mark and the paragraph mark, which don't generally have a semantic meaning in, people do not generally put section markers in their text. So it's something, or, hash mark is often quite safe.
Right.
But,
so what you're looking for is a unique delimiter that you'll very rarely see in the wild. That's really what it is. So let me solve, and I'll show you how I solved this morning. So I want to circle back at the end of this dialogue because I don't want to confuse ourselves. So this here's another perfect example of why we want a variable. So I'm going to say variable string v string, and again, to Mark's point, I don't have to put the colon declaration variable colon string. Tinderbox will do its best job, and this is one of the genius aspects of Tinderbox from Mr. Bernstein. It does a really good job of guessing your intent, but the kinder you can be to it by telling it specifically what you want, it's you're being kind to Tinderbox. So if you say v-string equals, so I'm going to make v-string equal to text. And to Art's point, and it took me you got it faster than I did. It took me about 10 minutes. You got it in about 30 seconds. That I guessed that the forward slashes in the URL were conflicting somehow with the Tinderbox regex. So I said v-string equals text.replace. And I immediately said, let's go ahead and replace the forward slash. And I use the backward slash as an escape because I'm telling the regex that I actually want you to treat. So if I just did this, the regex would treat this as a special operating character. But if I do the backward slash in front of the forward slash, that explicitly tells Tinderbox to treat this forward slash actually as a forward slash character. And what I want you to do is now replace that forward slash yet again with a delimiter that will not be equally recognizable anywhere else. So if I do that, I then, instead of passing text, I'm now passing the string. And see, now you can see too, Art, by using variables, it makes it a lot faster to go in, kind of universally change, what your action code is operating against versus using actual elements. So now when I do that and I hit apply, go to our log 11, you'll see I've got my entire URL and the forward slashes in the URL were replaced by that the mixing of the upside down and right side up exclamation point.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I've got and just to kind of play with this as well, and so people can learn other operators. If I say dot format, because it's kind of hard to see what's going on with these semicolons in here. Now the other now here's the other issue that I didn't have to contend with in this context, and the other reason why you want to use the section mark versus the colons, because if in the description of text it had a colon in it, that would automatically generate a list on you. So you can say format, and you go like that. And so if you were telling, this. So this is a quick and nerdy thing to do when you're logging, is you tell Tinderbox format 2 line breaks. And Tinderbox is smart in this context is it says, okay, you're giving me a list. And so what you're essentially asking me to do is to format the semicolon as a 2 line breaks. Now, if you wanted to be more specific, you could do that and tell it to format that, but we don't need to in this context. So if I go here and apply it, you'll see that it's actually it's taken in the context of this test, it's taken the semicolon and given me 2 line breaks. So now I can look at the list and look at the 4 elements that it parsed out of that list. The name pestle, the category it gave me, the description it gave, the author it gave me, and our modified URL, which we're going to go fix in just a second.
Can I just ask where I'm struggling to replicate your problem with the hash with the slashes. I can't replicate it in explode, and I can't replicate it with replace.
Okay.
So what was the code that you were using that broke?
Right, right here. Just split at the section mark.
Split. All right. No, I'll try split. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll keep trying.
Okay. Let me drop this in the.
No, it's fine. I'm just testing while you talk. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's something with split that kills that. And again, this is a great example too. Rather than getting frustrated with the tool, once I realized what it was doing, I just came up with a process that worked around it, as opposed to trying to beat it into submission into my own will. I just kind of worked with it. So does that make sense at this point? Everyone following me? Any comments, questions before I move to the next step? All good?
No, you have to turn your punctuation back, which I guess is what you're going to do now. Right?
Well, I will, but before that, what I want to do is I now want to also assign a prototype to this note. And I want to, so now we know what our list is. So, and then we want to start saying, okay, let's start populating the values of the various target attributes for the outcome of this list. Now, Tinderbox uses a 0-10 base list. So the first item in a list is 0. The second item list is 1, 2, 3, 4. So I actually have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 5 items in the list. 0 is being the designation of the first item in the list being 0. So if we go back to our text, what we can say is I want my name equal to the V list at 0. So I'm saying the first item in the list should become the name. And now I can just copy this 4 more times. 1, 2, 4. I want the author. No, I want the category to be the second item in the list. I want the author to be the third. What did I do in the V note? I use author. Yeah, I want the author to be the third item in the list. I want the description of the text to be the third item on the list. And I want the URL to be the 4th item on the list. And I'm gonna, and we might as well fix it right now. I'll say dot replace. All right. I'll grab this. Paste that there. And so now I want to reverse that replace, take the special character delimiter I put in there and return it back to its original. And then while we're done, at the end, I want the prototype to equal P note. Okay. And so then I go like that. And there you go. And it looks like I got the designations wrong. Author was 0, 1, 2, 3. Was author 1, 2, 0, 0, 1. So here you see 0, 1, 2. So the description was actually I got the points missed. So author is actually 3. And text is 2. And here's a great example of destruction because I thought I had it right with my great bravado here, and I overwrite my original text. And this is a great example of sawing off the bridge that the branch that I was standing on. I no longer have the original text. that I was working with. So sometimes it's helpful when you're trying to figure this out is you will stick the original text in my string, but in this context, I don't need to. I can go back to the original text, paste it into here. So when you're doing this, at some point, you want to have your original text somewhere. And so I'm going to get back to where I was originally texted. And then we don't need my string now. Now I can hit apply. And you'll see I've now dutifully parsed what ChatGPT has given me. I've got my name, I've got its category, I've got its URL. You'll see that the URL is all perfectly formatted now. I've got its author. Now that I know that it works, I can go select all of the notes, hit apply, and I've now dutifully parsed every single one of those notes into their attributes. Yeah, Art, you had a question?
No, actually well, first I have to thank you because I can definitely see myself using this particular thing, process. But second, I was also going to say it's because I make so many mistakes. I usually will write a stamp which will replace the text of my experiment note with the originating text, because then I can mess up as many times as I need to. Then I just hit the stamp and boom, replace the text in it.
Right.
Yeah, but that was it. But great, thank you.
And then another piece of cleanup I had here is, I don't really like capitalized alt text, so I'll create another stamp. I'll say, all right, and we'll say, hey, Leslie, hang on, I guess, real quick. Just a second. Oh, Leslie or Adam, thanks. All right, sorry. My mom's calling for my daughter's 21st birthday today. Where was, oh yeah, so then I'll say name equals name dot capitalize. And then I go like that. And these are acronyms, so I want those capitalized, but the rest I don't. I'll go like that. And then and then I'll just fix this one manually. And there you go. And now we've got a list of all, and then I'll just move it out of explode. And we now have a list of, and if we want a number really quick, we can go like here and say child count. And I now have a list of 12 of the most common macroeconomic analysis frameworks used for evaluating an industry, including one that I've been developing and refining. And so now it took us what, half an hour, 20 minutes to kind of incrementally step through doing that. In reality, in this morning, when I came up with the idea that I needed to do this entire process took me about less than 10 minutes. And so it's really, really an effective way to kind of do that collection and curation, activities. And then the other thing, what I would often do in situations like this, I would do prompts. This is something I'm getting more used to. I'll be a prompt and a string. And then I quickly go to my user generated attributes. Prompt, make that like 3 characters long. I'd go back to my chat. And then I would say, I would add in my prompt, give me a formatted list of the top. Name, category, description, author, URL, and then I'd say chat GPT 4.0. And so that way I'd be able to retain, and I wouldn't, and then this is where I made a mistake. I do this all the time. I stick the content in my prototype, but then I would go up here and I say prompt. And I would say model. And then that way I have the model, the prompt and the model I use to get that content. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I think I may have got to the bottom of the seeming glitch.
All right, let's stop sharing.
So
screen.
should I share for a moment? So this is actually also a good example of the thing you and I are often doing, right? Let's do a teardown. So if you stop sharing, I'll just put this. Put this up. Oops, no. Stop. I think you'll. Oh no, there we go. Right. Okay. Let's put. What is that? Oh, right. That's everything's. Oh, everything's in the wrong place. Right. Share.
We're seeing a black screen right now.
Yeah, no, because it's doing. Oh, right. No, stop sharing. Right. Okay. Let me start again. I'll put the right thing on the right. Put where I want it. I keep. Oh, I see what's happening. Right. That over there. Don't want that. Put that there. Put that there. Too many screens. Sorry. Share.
Just get the 149-inch one. Like
Oh,
Michael has.
Life changing.
Indeed.
Really is.
Now, folks, can you see this one? Are you seeing something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So I nonsense name for the
by the way,
note.
before you start, why don't you talk about your method, your method of the teardown first?
Well, okay. So the starting point in normally this is that conversation between people will be it's not working, and I've got. And you'll look at it, and there's this whole nest of stuff. No, I'm not going to talk sideways. So let me move the screen over here. That's better. And so you've got this whole nest of stuff, and you're deep in the problem. As the only bit that's not working is this thing, but in fact, you're sitting in a whole nest of code. And the what is immediately apparent is the thing that you're looking at is wrong, because when you press the button, the wrong thing happens. So at that point, you need to sit back and say, wait a minute, whoa, there are all sorts of things around this. So I'm saying to myself that when I call this routine, this operator, I get the wrong thing back. Is that true? Well, let's make a new small note and test that and that alone. Because either there's a bug with that, which we can prove, or what's actually happening is what I'm seeing is something coming in from elsewhere in the process. And it's so easy to do. You're sitting really close there. You spent all afternoon getting to this point, and you're this far away from success. And something's going wrong, and it's obviously the thing you're looking at, because why would it not be? But of course, it turns out often to be the other way around. So the thing to do at this point, if you can but remember, and I'm terrible at it, is to say, no, stop. Take this thing that you think is wrong, put it in just put the smallest possible test you can into a new document and prove to yourself that the error occurs. If it does, then you can send a polite message to Mark saying, I think I found a problem. And he'll probably write back and say, that comma in the second line, did you mean to put that? Oh crap. But maybe sometimes you find something wrong. But the point is, it helps you, and indeed it helps him, because if you did find something wrong, then you've actually got something encapsulated, monkey see, monkey do, because with a small file also you can say, look, and here is the file that proves this. And you'll see this sometimes going on in the forum. So someone will make a small file. Let's get to the bottom of actually what it is that you think you're doing. Take it out of the larger context. So here the problem was that we had this text, and when we were tearing it down, the slashes here appeared to be a problem. So I thought, okay, how do I test that? So the first thing is, let me find which of the many screens is my stamp. So this is really quick and dirty. So first of all, I tried replacing the text with a line break in this note, but I've done other things since. So let's do that. We'll run that. Well, that's fine. There's no problem there. So it's not replaced. And then it was pointed out that actually the issue is that it's split. So I thought, okay, well, let's split out. Let's do this, and into the my list of this note, we'll put the contents of the split. So if I get back to my test note, I press this. Well, that's interesting. It's odd. I got something before. Oh, sorry, it's gone into here. But I'll put that so you can see what it said, which is, what did I say? Test. So we'll stamp this note. We'll go and look at test. Oops. Have I mistyped that? Oops.
No, you want my list test.
Oh, right. Yes, sorry. Thinking and typing at the same time never works.
Well, don't you want to delete text test? There you go.
I do. I absolutely do. Thank you. So right, we're gonna set the my list in the note test, which happens to be at root, to a split of the text. So if I run that here, and the point being that here is our URL unbroken. Okay, so what's going on there then? Well, then I looked at Michael's code and I thought, wait a minute, what's actually happening is it's going through a string. So let's put so in test 3, I'm gonna look at the list that comes out of the split, and in test 2, I'll look at what he actually came out. So is the problem with the format or is it with the split? If I go and do that, what we see is that there's nothing that's split, but actually the issue is that when we read back from the list, the list variable created using split. So we know split works. So there is something to report here. Something weird is going on. And if I had to hazard a guess, if you use the command line set operator, which is often a way of doing find and replace, the standard delimiter for the find and the replace is to use /. And I suspect that something like that has crept through. But and this is another point. When I'm making a report like this, I might say I think it might be this. I've learned to not say it is this because I don't know. I'm not clever enough. But at the same time, I think it is also helpful if you think you know what it might be. I think of myself at the other end of this, possibly catching this on an escalator somewhere on a phone, thinking, "Oh, there's been some crisis. What is it now?" It can be helpful if you genuinely think that there's something that might be part of the problem, to feed that in. So my suspicion from what I see here is that something strange is going on when we're using split in the context of a variable.
Yeah, and again, you might say too, to Mark's point, I think it has to do something with regex, possibly with paths. I do think it has something to do with the path designation of when it's creating the note. So
well, but if you think about it, it's more likely. If you've ever used the command line replace operator sed, as I say, when you pass sed something, you say essentially couple of commands / thing to match / thing to replace / funny thing. So if slashes are disappearing, might this be that we're feeding it all these delimiters and it doesn't understand? The point is we don't know because it happens behind the curtain, and it doesn't really matter. It's clearly not intentional. It's not intended, and it's kind of weird thing that also it shows the difficulty for the developer and the testers to catch all these things, because the number of combinations you can do, I'm not very good at maths, but somebody else can work it out, actually. With all these tools in the box, there is a multiplicity of things that might happen. And just sometimes when you roll the dice, you get something unexpected. So it might be that. But I would also hold my hand up and say more often than not, it'll turn out to be something else completely different. But now we've spotted that, that's probably fixable. So the issue that you've worked around, and here's a useful thing too, is that it looks as though there is an issue and that can be fixed. But what you showed is a really good example of, okay, well, fine, we've hit this roadblock, but we can find a way around that. There's a little bit of extra work. So you don't have to stop today and wait for something to be fixed. You can see, if you know what's missing, you think, oh, right, okay, so it's unhappy with this particular character. Well, what we can do is we can swap that around. We can fool it. We can be cleverer than the computer. We can fool it by giving it something it won't dislike, and then we can change it back later. So two tests for one there.
Yeah. Okay. Did we lose Art? We did.
I think we did.
And we lost Bruce. God, we lost a lot. Okay. So thoughts, comments around that. When you pop back onto video? Your reaction?
Oh, I enjoyed watching it. All right,
Okay.
just a sidelight with sed for the command line, if anybody cares. An interesting thing about sed is that most of the time you see examples that use a slash as the separator between search and replace on it, but it's actually the first character after the S command that is used, which is really handy when you have to deal with slashes.
Yeah.
So
But of course,
but most
of course, you only know that after it's long after being useful, because after you've wasted all afternoon trying to sort of, because of course it's obvious after the fact. But yeah, exactly. I remember when I discovered that I could change the limiters and thinking, why did nobody tell me?
Yes, right. That is a relatively obscure sed fact.
All right. So there is a great little tutorial on the use of variables, workarounds on using the variables, and using ChatGPT to find lists and parsing lists. And again, prior to ChatGPT and Tinderbox, this kind of work would have taken me days. To go find the resources, find the books, search in Google, copy and paste, and all that. And we were able to generate that list, and then we can iterate against it and curate it in minutes. So pretty exciting stuff. I find it exciting, but I'm kind of a geek. I'll admit that.
So I'll throw up something as we're so winding towards the end, really as a straw man for later, just genuinely in case it's of use to anyone. So what I said the other day, I was working on something and I wondered if it might be useful to look through. I've actually dusted off one of the bits of research in my thesis, which of course is never read by you apart from you and your mum. And so what I put into paper, and I've been promising this for about 5 years. I finally dusted it off. And it's interesting. It happens to be I'm doing some research on stuff in Wikipedia. The Wikipedia part is not interesting. Where I think it might be interesting is that it's an empiricist's worst nightmare. Every single rule I look at is broken. So, a bot has to have bot in the name, except when it doesn't. A bot has to be run by one person, except when it doesn't. And everything that you might measure with an empirical measure in my data set, in my source set, is flawed because it's built by humans for pragmatic reasons, who are sitting, basically trying to change the engine as the plane's flying along. So there's no problem there. There isn't a problem with what I'm looking at, but there is a real challenge for doing something where everyone else in the room says, oh, well, you just write this algorithm or you just stick it in this ChatGPT query. And no, you can't, because you actually have to juggle an awful lot of plates to just see where the reality of the story is. So it ends up being something really messy. But if you look beyond the immediate source material, it might be a sort of substrate we could use to talk about, well, you know, what do you measure and what's worth keeping, and at what point do you need to be seeing everything? For instance, do I need to be seeing sort of 40 displayed attributes all the time? Or maybe I need only a few at this stage and then different ones at a later stage. They're all things I've worked through. This work I originally did would have been done in version 7 back in about 2017. I had another nibble at it about 2 years later, and I'm really doing it for the second time properly 5 years on. The overall thing is to basically try and create a longitudinal data set of every bot account that ever existed in Wikipedia. I think it's almost impossible to do because the data is so broken, because so many things aren't recorded. But one can have a go at it. And why is it interesting? Well, for all the people who want to do something based on information like that, then at least there's a data set that's probably as hard-edged as you can get. Because every time I see a paper said, oh, I just took, you know, report X, I think, I don't think you took the data you did, because that is just demonstrably false in almost every occasion with Wikipedia. Doesn't mean the information in the articles is false. It means that, but the moment you think you got a very fixed set of information, you almost certainly didn't, unless you're quite canny. But as I say, I think it may have a wider resonance for the sort of information munging that a lot of people are doing. So it doesn't matter whether you're doing it for research, it might be, you know, you're doing it for your company or whatever, but the data's messy. Because we like to think, you know, the humanities will tell you it's all about power structures. The sort of computer scientists will tell you it's all about writing the right algorithm. But as I'm finding with the work I'm doing at the moment, neither of those things even bounce off the surface of the information that you're trying to make sense of.
Yeah.
So
And
would it be interesting?
again,
I mean, would it
Tinderbox
be
as a
interesting
tool,
to use that as a substrate for kicking about research?
for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because that's something you can package up for us and maybe do on a meetup.
Well, the information itself is fairly messy. I think a more useful, well, what I'm proposing is to say, like, I can show you what I'm working on at the moment. I don't really want to sort of share the whole document is a bit gnarly, and I'd have to do an awful lot of work to make the document understandable to somebody else, because as we know from writing demos, turns out there's 10 times as much work in explaining what you see to someone reading asynchronously as to just seeing on a screen. But I did think we could use the context of a really messy data set to sort of mull through things that, you know, one might try, because the issue isn't the exact thing you're looking at or the domain you're working in. It's really more that I've got something that just doesn't make sense. I know there's something in there, but what reasonably might I look for? What would, you know, which tools in the box should I pull out at this point? You know, like, should I now be looking at this in a different view, for instance? And anyway, that's the thought was in my mind. What do people think?
Nice. Yeah, I think it's good.
Side thought. I think it's interesting. But just something that, when you're talking, I was brought to mind about messy data is about categories of things. There's a book called "There's No Such Thing as Fish," because the problem with, if you try to define fish, any definition that you come up with either excludes things that you're sure are fish, or includes things that you're sure are not fish.
Yeah.
Or both.
Yeah. I mean,
a lot of categories are like that.
I thought the thing that really sort of made me stop and think about it was, I thought, well, why am I doing this? Well, I did it because I promised my supervisor about 5 years ago that I'd do it, and I thought, okay, I've got a moment now, and then I started thinking about, so what's the contribution? So if you're sitting down to contribute something that is broken on every possible measurable axis, what's the benefit? Well, part of the benefit is if you are short-sighted enough to think you're going to look at this subject using a purely sort of something like a digital humanities lens or a, you know, or a computer algorithm, you failed at step one to understand anything meaningful. So the idea is to say maybe, but what you can get is you can get a sort of data set that's good enough that you can say, don't worry about the exact whether this is 5 or 7, because that's not really the point. What you can say is this one's 5 and that one's 5 million, which is sort of more the sort of thing that people are wanting to do with this data. And I didn't know this when I started, and I don't think I would have been able to do the original research if I hadn't have had a tool like Tinderbox, because I just didn't know where I was going. I started out naively believing that, you know, I could sort of press a button and basically get the answer. No, turned out to not be the case. And even when I did get the sort of answer just turned out to be sort of fractally not consistent. Every single question you might ask was just full of exceptions, which, funnily enough, as humans, we deal with much better than computers. We're quite good about saying, well, it's fine. It makes sense acting. There's a grey bit at the edge, but we don't need to worry about that, because we genuinely don't need to worry about that. But a binary system can't cope with that because there isn't a grey bit between the 0 and the 1. And this gets, I think, to me, back to the heart of tools for thought. So we're using digital tools to do clever manipulations for us, but still allowing us as humans to deal with the gnarly bits that don't just fall into neat boxes.
Perfect. Hey, by the way, Win, book, No Such Thing as Fish. I found a podcast of that title, but who's the author or what's?
Oh, I'd have to go back and
Can
look.
you do a quick search? I can't find it. Give us a few seconds and then we can wrap it up for the day. Yeah, but it's amazing how such a simple little exercise, splitting a list, can lead to an hour-and-a-half long discussion and the existential thoughts and ideas of working with content and data.
So I have a question that at this point is probably for another time, but I'll throw it out. I have just because of things coming in from input in various places, I'm poking around a little bit with Obsidian for fun when I wasn't trying to do something serious, and it seems that there are some things that Obsidian may make much easier than Tinderbox that seem useful. And this may be just the category of the tool. And then clearly a lot of things that Tinderbox does that are probably much harder in Obsidian. And I'm trying to sort of understand that for either use in sort of what appropriate use cases are, or whether it's one of those cases where being more familiar with one tool is just overall more valuable than dealing with it for it. So I'm wondering about this.
So we have a couple minutes. Do you have some thoughts on that yet, or do you want me to rattle off my initial thoughts on that?
Since I have just been on vacation for a week, literally got back last night, and I was not thinking about any of this. I do not have coherent thoughts about it. It just sort of popped to mind as we were talking earlier again. And we had a few minutes before end of time. That's
yeah. So for me, I use Obsidian and Tinderbox daily, side by side with each other. Yeah, and honestly, in some respects, I use Obsidian as much as I use Tinderbox. Obsidian for me is my scratch notes area, where I basically any thought or idea that comes to mind, I first throw it into Obsidian, and then we go from there. Obsidian has a concept called properties, which are analogous to Tinderbox attributes. And then using stream parsing in Tinderbox, you can pull Obsidian attributes into Tinderbox attributes incredibly easily. Obsidian works wonderfully with Markdown because it's basically a Markdown processor. So some things that Obsidian does really great is I can pull like a Microsoft Word document or a Google document and paste it into Tinderbox. And all of the HTML styling, like headings and bullets in particular, or tables, instantly become Markdown formatted, which then allows me to pull all of that now perfectly parsed Markdown from Obsidian into Tinderbox, and then I can use Pandoc to render it. So, and then also, because now I've got perfectly formatted Markdown, pulling it into Tinderbox, I now have very clear delimiters like 1 hashtag, 2 hashtag, 3 hashtag to be able to explode and parse the material, and get it into discrete and atomic notes to work on it. So that's at a very high level, things that I find Obsidian does really well that Tinderbox does not. Where Obsidian for me falls down is as great are the plugins. I find Obsidian plugins like way too much coding for me. I can't do it. And there's a bit of there's a lot of obscurity for me in the plugins in that I don't really know what they're doing, and I can't review their code to make sure they're doing what I expect or want them to do, or that they're not doing what I don't want them to do. Whereas with Tinderbox plugins, aka templates and functions and action code, I can read the code and know what it's doing. So there's privacy issue for me that I prefer more with Tinderbox. Secondly, Obsidian doesn't have action code like capability, so you don't have the ability to parse and run all of that functions. And Obsidian has templating, but only through plugins, whereas with the Tinderbox, I can write on my own templates. Similarly, Obsidian has some views, and actually in some respects it has more views than Tinderbox because of third-party plugins. But honestly, I find Tinderbox's 10 built-in views more approachable, and then the fact that I can write my own templates means that I have an infinite number of plugins as well, including views, including as Paul Christie brought up earlier, posters. Which Obsidian doesn't really do. So I just find the manipulation of data using action code and templates so much easier in Tinderbox. It's completely unapproachable for me in Obsidian. Or also Obsidian's application UI structure is very much rigidly fixed to the outline view. And Obsidian search is kind of wonky. It's kind of hard to sometimes find what you're looking for. Whereas in Tinderbox, you've got agents, and then you've got a much cleaner way of finding your stuff. So that's my very off the cuff, high level view. I mean, Canvas is great too. I agree, Erwin. But it's also yet again having to learn another tool, and I struggle with some of those. I don't have an Obsidian-like community that I participate in that teaches me all the ins and outs of Obsidian.
I have a thought. I'm sorry I had to duck out for a second to get something at the door, but one thought I put in is that when I look at Obsidian, I see, well, Obsidian looks to me like it has the code smell of a code IDE, and I think it's much closer to a computer science empirical measure this, do that thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. It also postdates the world of basically web systems, cloud systems, everything synced everywhere. Tinderbox's hinterland arguably goes back to Story Space, which takes us back to about the mid-1980s. Now, Story Space was written 3 times, and I know it shares a code base with Tinderbox now, but I think it's something to note that it has grown up on the Mac desktop using the comparative power of the Mac desktop. Now, in the meantime, we've had cloud compute and all that sort of thing that sort of, in a way, eclipses things. But it still ties in quite closely to the ecosystem of Lingno, which is one of the reasons why it isn't a sync everywhere all the time on every possible platform. Because it turns out, and there have been discussions along the way, that a lot of things we just want to do turn out to use a little bit more work than we imagine. So if you wanted to have those things in Tinderbox in an always-on, everywhere fashion, you probably would need to rebuild the app in a very different way. So the reality is there's no wrong and no right here. I mean, in a sense, so we have a tool we like that's situated in a niche that we don't quite want, or many of us don't quite want, but for a reason. And I think that's as closely as you can frame it. So there are other things that will do things we might want to do. Certainly the syncing and availability.
Well, and to everyone's point,
definitely best investment.
and to everyone's point in the comments, which is another reason why I use Obsidian, is it's on my phone, it's on my tablet, it's on a PC, it's on a web, or it's on a Mac. I mean, Obsidian is kind of that universal, accessible scratch tool for me.
Yeah.
Tinderbox is not. But again, I can't do my analysis and write my reports and do everything that I do in Tinderbox with Obsidian. So they go hand in hand, and I use them both constantly.
But here's the thing, and and this is my way of pushback, but it's something I ask myself is, well, how many really cool thoughts do I have when I'm sitting on the john or I'm walking on the front? There is in the way that to a certain extent people sell deodorants because they want to convince us we need to buy stuff, not because we're necessarily smelly. Do I actually need everything everywhere all the time, or how? So the easy thing is just say, give me everything everywhere all the time, because then I don't have to think, and this is the main thing. I don't have to understand. And there is something, and it is not a one-size-fits-all, which is the problem, because this is the sort of area where there's scope for everyone to feel, mightily put out. But I do find myself thinking there are some things, where I wouldn't dream of doing this task on my phone.
Well, I agree, and for me, it's the chum bucket, right? And much like art with his poetry, and because I'm getting more and more into writing books or something, when I hear somebody say something in a phraseology that I would not use, I'm going to want to write it down immediately, stick it in Obsidian, and and a lot of the times I never go back. Just the very fact of capturing it, writing it, reinforces it for my brain. So it's also that methodology, but then I have it and I can always go back. But for me, Obsidian is that chum bucket.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think it's reminding us ourselves that again, we get weaned into this notion of one tool for everything.
Yeah.
And actually just saying, no, my absolute expectation is I'm basically going to have these other things that here, and I can get at them. So the things that need to be gettable at, which are designed from the get-go to be that, can deliver that for me.
Right.
When I want to do more subtle things or things that I can't do elsewhere, I probably need to do them in this context. It seems inconvenient at first sight, but actually I'm not sure it is, because if you stop to consider the cost of building something that does everything everywhere all the time, it turns out these things tend not to get built.
So in other words, we live in a world of ors, a world of ands, not ors. It's not this or that. It's this and that and that and that and that. Unfortunately, guys, I got to run. So if I you were looking for a quick reference for us on that?
I was looking for the book about the Chandler, the sort of the system that never got built. Dreaming in Code, I think it was called, which is an interesting read, but riffs on this thing that, in a sense, be careful what you wish for. Nothing wrong with the idea, but you may not get to the end point.
Yeah. Okay, I got to run. Hey, everybody. Thank you very much. This is awesome.
Thanks.
Bye.